Welcome, everybody. My name is Mina Jane, and I'm the director of the Ashland Public Library. And I'm really pleased to be here with Lindsay-Jean Hard, who wrote the book Cooking with Scraps. And we had her here last year and there you go. We had a wonderful, wonderful time. And she invited her pal, Amy Emberling. Am I saying that right?
Emberling.
Emberling. I had it right there. From Zingerman's Bakehouse to talk about their new book, Celebrate Every Day. And we are going to be doing a demonstration, and we're going to be talking about the books, and we're going to be talking about Zingerman's, and we're going to be talking about food and sustainability and finding ways to limit food wastage. So before we get to that, I just want to say quickly, I want to thank the Friends of the Ashland Public Library for supporting all of our programs. I'd like to thank Lindsay-Jean and Amy for sharing this allowing us to share this program with other libraries. 20 local libraries signed on for this program. And Lindsay-Jean knows this, is I think when libraries get together, we make magic. And now, Amy, you know it too. So I welcome all the patrons from those libraries, as well as fans of Lindsay-Jean and Amy and Zingerman's. And so you can buy signed books from Lindsay-Jean and Amy from Aesop's Fable. I'll put a link to that in the chat. And if you have questions, put them in the Q&A. If you want to just chat with each other throughout the entire thing, you can do that in the chat. So let's get started. I'm very, like I said, super excited to see Lindsay-Jean again. She did a wonderful talk on her book, Cooking with Scraps, last year. And I think she's going to make a recipe from that book today. And so that's really awesome. And she's just, I always say, a sustainability warrior, an amazing speaker, and just an inspiration. And Amy Emberling is a managing partner of Zingerman's Bakehouse out in Ann Arbor. And she's got a long history of baking and being part of the community. And I think that we'll have a lot of really interesting conversational topics to go over as they start. So welcome, Amy and Lindsay-Jean. Thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you, Mina. It's really a pleasure, everybody, to be here. So I apologize for my voice. Just started to go this afternoon, but I am confident we can accomplish the demo if you can put up with sort of harsh sound. We're both really excited to be here. I want to tell you a little bit about how this collaboration started. So I'm the managing partner of Zingerman's Bakehouse, and Lindsay-Jean was working with me at the bakery doing the marketing of the bakehouse. And, you know, one thing that we really tried to do at the bakery is not waste anything, which is also people's minds. And we work in a very, cliche, flat organization where we collaborate all the time. So we were, doing our work. And although Lindsay-Jean's not a professional baker, she talked to me about, maybe we didn't have to throw those banana peels out that she saw as she walked through the bakery. And so we talked about sustainability and food waste. And then she taught me that we could actually use the banana peels in our banana bread. And that began a really wonderful relationship. And then we decided to write this book together, Celebrate Every Day, in which we feature some ways in which we have reduced food waste. So that's how this all started. We wanted to give you a little, since you're not here in Ann Arbor with us, wanted to give you a little sense of what Zingerman's is like. And so we have a lot of really great artwork because we have artists who work in the organization. And so in the spirit of we're demonstrating banana bread for you, here is just a funky, happy picture of banana bread, somewhat in the making. I think this is actually a loaf right here. Note the banana sun. Nothing can be better than that. So thank you again for coming. And we want to tell you a little bit more about how we are approaching food waste at the bakery. It's our overall sort of perspective or philosophy of the bakery to process things as little as possible. We think that you can get more flavor from things, better texture, better color, and overall more nutrition. So the other thing that happens when you process things less is that you can have less waste. And we're getting very close to Earth Day. And so it would seem very appropriate for us to demonstrate and talk about a few ways in which we reduce food waste here at Zingerman's Bakehouse. So in most food businesses, of course, we want to reduce waste. But mainly the way we think about it is we want to reduce wasting raw ingredients that we're using either to cook dishes or to bake with. And we want to reduce waste of throwing out food that's already been completely made. I mean, you can't have sort of a profitable business that is sustainable and last if you don't manage those resources. But with Lindsay-Jean's help, we kind of opened our eyes up to another level of reducing waste. And we looked at all the different ways that we were processing our raw ingredients and how we could possibly minimize scraps that were going into the landfill. I'm gonna let Lindsay-Jean take us to the next slide.
So a few examples of this that we're doing here at the Bakehouse, but you can also be doing at home, is to quit peeling. So the examples that you see are peach pie and carrot cake and apple pie, and then the banana bread that we're going to be talking to you about later. And I think this is a really important thing for us to think about. A lot of this is just habit, that we'll read a recipe and it'll tell us to peel a carrot or to peel an apple. And sometimes we're in a position of privilege enough that we don't have to think about it. And so a lot of cooking with scraps and waste reduction is really just changing our assumptions about things and taking a minute to think on if we really need to do that or not. I remember one of the first times I saw our colleague Hazem eat an apple, and my mind was just blown because he ate the apple from the bottom to the top. And when he was done eating the apple, there was nothing left except for a couple of seeds in the stem. And I couldn't believe what he was doing. And I realized that it was really just my learned behavior. I was taught how to eat an apple. I was taught that you get rid of the core. And really, we don't need to. The core is entirely edible. The seeds can be poisonous, but you would have to eat a lot of them. We're just used to that the core is a different texture, and so it's bad, but it doesn't mean that it's bad. It can be used for other things. So the same thing by keeping all of these peels on all of these things that we're baking here at the Bakehouse, we're leaving all of this nutrition into the items that we're eating, and they have flavor benefits and visual benefits. There's more fiber in them. And we've stopped composting literal thousands of pounds of produce that can be eaten. And we're going to circle back to that later. But one of the other things I think people tend to have a visceral reaction of like, oh, like I shouldn't do that because the texture is not going to be good, or it's dirty. I don't want to do that. But there are simple ways to handle all of those. You can wash the produce. You can make sure you're buying organic, or talk to the farmers about their growing practices so you know where these things are coming from and how they're growing.
Right. I want to talk about this just a little bit before you change slides. One thing that you didn't say was that it adds a lot of color when you leave the peels in, and it can be much more beautiful. So like an apple pie in which you leave those peels on often has this beautiful sort of red tinge to it. And the peach pies, when we leave the peels on, you can't tell that the peels are on at all. They really get melty. Now the apple pies, sometimes you can. And actually, the later in the season, the older the apples are, the more sort of leathery the peels get, and the more we might get feedback from customers. But as Lindsay-Jean said, it's just this sort of cultural gut reaction that it's not okay. So lots of our customers accepted it happily. Every once in a while, we get some feedback. We actually did last week, just for all of you to know. I think it's interesting. Someone said that it was disgusting. It was the most disgusting thing, which was just interesting to me. It's real food. If you ate an apple in your hand, even as an American, often we eat it with the peel on. So to think it was disgusting was a funny idea. And then to talk about the privilege a little bit, it's also, if you're trained in French cooking, there's a lot of processing the food, shaping things to make it look beautiful. And so it was, that version of cooking, which I think sort of was to some degree the foundation of a lot of Western cooking, led us into food a little bit as art, and not necessarily so much about nutrition. And I think we're just trying to take that back a little bit. And this still can be beautiful in a more rustic way, and that you can be an elevated cook, but not have to be working the food so much.
Yeah.
So
it's so interesting to think about how much of this is based on where we're learning information or where our family's from or our socioeconomic status or our culture or even the time, like the generation that we're part of.
Right.
They're all factors in how we think about food waste.
Right, absolutely. So another way in which we are reducing waste is that we're milling a fair amount of our own grain at the Bakehouse, and we're using whole grain. And we started to realize that essentially by using whole grain, we're not peeling the grain anymore. So you can see on the slide a wheat kernel, and on the I have a little. I don't know if we can see this. I'm going to move this for a second. I don't know if it will show up in your screen. No, okay. Well, sort of. This is our a little wheat kernel in the Zingerman's drawing, but it's a little difficult to see. So on the outside of the wheat kernel is bran. And I think even in our culture, we've sort of had different thoughts about whether bran is something that you want to avoid, or bran is just if you're having some issues and you need to eat some bran, you know, not that it's food that you would want to eat necessarily. But the bran has tons of fiber, which Americans traditionally are not getting enough of. And it has lots of micronutrients in it. Then the largest part of the wheat kernel is the endosperm, and that's what we all are used to eating in white flour. And then you have the germ, which is the food of the kernel that is often removed in making all-purpose flour or white flour, and it's got tons of nutrients and the food for the plant in it. So by milling ourselves and using whole grain, we're no longer taking that bran off and peeling it, but instead we're eating it. Which it's just more nutritious. And why throw out that really good food? One interesting fact that I read about was that in World War II, in some European countries, millers were forbidden to make white flour because there was a shortage and people were starving. And so they knew that it was more nutrition if you ate whole grain, so whole wheat flour. So why are we spending all this time peeling our flour? Now at the bakery, we do use some white flour, but we are using more and more whole grain. So while we're on that topic, I want to talk a little bit, just in case some of you hear about flour, and I think our conversations and the words that we use about it is changing and becoming sort of more complicated, just like we all know, or many people who are into chocolate know about the percentages cacao in chocolate, so we might say it's 58% or 71%. Well, we're starting to talk about wheat wheat flour in a more complicated way also. So refined white flour or all-purpose flour, that's actually what's called 70% extraction. That means that 70% of the wheat berry ends up in the flour. And then they have what's called high extraction flour, and that is 80% of the wheat berry ends up in the flour. And then finally, if you see on a bag and it says whole grain flour, it should mean that the entire wheat berry was milled and is all in the flour. I'm afraid that the government is not entirely monitoring this, so you can't be certain. So you just want to think about, the different mills or brands that you're buying from to find out, if they're really using whole grain or not. So why did we do this? We really think we love to learn here, just like all of you who are here, from the library. I suspect a lot of you really like to learn. So for us, that's fun. So that's one reason. Whole grains have a lot more flavor. When you mill sort of very soon before you're going to use it, there is much better aroma and then more flavor. And on that point, I want to say to all of you that it's very easy to mill flour at home. You can get a little tabletop mill. It's just like grinding coffee. If any of you do that, you just pour those wheat berries in. You can push a button. You can become more, get more complicated about it, know exactly what grind you want and make the stones of your mill closer together to make it finer. But within, a minute, you can have freshly milled flour. It just adds a tiny bit of time to making your morning pancakes or muffins or anything that's relatively simple. Obviously, whole mill flour gives more nutrition, as I said earlier. And at the bakery, we're really dedicated to flavor and using great ingredients and traditional methods. So milling with a stone mill is very traditional, thousands of years old. And we really love to connect to our community. And so we're using a lot of grain that's within between 1 and 4 hours of the bakery. Finally, in terms of the sustainability, I also want to say that, you know, it's much more sustainable to use the grain that's local than to be bringing in grain that's from the far west of the United States. So grain used to be grown all over the country. But as time went on, farmers in the West, you know, their farmland was most hospitable to something like grain and not hospitable to a ton of other vegetables. So they started to become more and more involved with grain farming, and they were able to get better yields. And so people in, you know, areas, regions like Michigan, the Southeast, or even the East Coast just couldn't keep up with that production. And so it became a pricing issue. And that's why we're all buying this grain from the West Coast. But you can grow it locally, and many communities are now making an effort to buy local and to, you know, pay for that rather than paying for the fossil fuel to ship it across the country. Okay, I know that was a lot about grain. I'm a little passionate about it. Hope you can appreciate that.
All right, next, I mentioned composting and then I was gonna circle back to that. So this little graphic helps to explain why reducing composting matters. I think some of us hear composting and we automatically think, well, what's the big deal? Composting is a good thing, and it is, absolutely. I'm a gardener, I compost at home. I'm not going to say anything bad about composting, except that it's not the first thing that we want to be doing to prevent food waste. So if you look at this, this is the EPA's wasted food scale, and you'll see the dark green is what we want to be doing to prevent food waste. Like these are the best options for us. And then circling down to the other side, it's what we want to be avoiding. They're our last resorts. And you'll notice that composting is further to the right. It's only 2 steps above all of this food going to the landfill. So it's not that composting is bad, it's just we would prefer to be doing other things. We would prefer to be eating it or preventing it being wasted in the first point. So that's why we're so excited about putting these peels in all of these foods, is we're not composting them, we're eating them. We're getting all of those benefits that we talked about from these things. And another thing that I like to think about with this is that wasted food still required all of those resources to make it happen. You know, food gets wasted at every part of the food chain, and part of that isn't preventable, but you know, food gets left in the fields, food get lost in transport, food doesn't get sold in grocery stores, we let food go bad in our refrigerators. So just to be thinking about that, if we're wasting food, like it still took all of those resources to get to that point. It took all of the water, it took all of the labor, it took all the people driving this across the country. So we want to be honoring all of that and preventing as much waste as we can.
And then if you think about it, when we're wasting it, we add more resources to it as we cart it away.
Yes, yes.
Right, take the time to put it in the garbage. We had plastic bags to put it in the garbage or in compost bags that had to be created somehow.
Yes.
And then usually it still has to have some kind of truck, take it someplace. So we're adding even more resources to something that we're not going to use. It's just unfortunate.
Yes, it really is.
Yeah.
So that's why we're going to prevent it and eat all of this food.
Okay, so finally, we wrote this book together. It's really about celebrating. That's the main theme of the book. But there are some recipes in it that show how we're trying to waste less food. So we use whole grains in these first recipes, funky chunky cookies, a really rustic Irish soda bread, and then another cookie that we call the Michigan Double because it has 2 different kinds of chocolate in it. And then if you want to try your hand at baking a pie and not peeling it, there's a really nice, very classic apple pie recipe. And then if you want to do both together, whole grains and no peeling, you can make carrot cake with 100% whole wheat flour and don't peel those carrots. And then we're going to do the banana bread with you tonight. And then a really nice fruit cobbler that has peaches and blueberries. So thank you for listening to all that. And now we're going to show you how to make banana bread. I can show you what it looks like. When it comes out of the oven, looks just like classic banana bread. So I want to tell them the story about the banana bread
Yeah.
and then we can get going.
Absolutely.
So we had a wonderful customer. It was a chain of it is a chain of grocery stores, and they were making their own banana bread. And they decided they didn't want to have their own house bakery anymore, but they sold a lot of banana bread. And so they came to us and said, would you make this banana bread for us? And I will tell you, I love banana bread, and I think it's a totally wonderful thing to eat. But as a professional baker, it wasn't the most exciting thing to think that we would spend our time in the bakery making banana bread. You know, we wanted to make things that no one makes at home. Like rarely do people make their own croissant or their own really wonderful French baguette. That's the kind of thing that we think people want to pay us to do. But they were a great customer, so we said we would do. But then, okay, what can we do to elevate it? Because if we're going to make this banana bread, we really want to make a great banana bread, and we want to make a banana bread in a way that people are not making it at home. So the first thing that we did was started to use whole grain. And then the second thing we did was with Lindsay-Jean's lead, decided not to peel the bananas. And it makes a much moister and more flavorful banana bread, and clearly more nutritious. So now I'm actually super excited about making banana bread because I think it's really interesting, and it speaks to a lot of our other values. Okay.
All right. So we are going to start with frozen and thawed bananas. And I will switch to overhead view in a second so you can see everything that I'm doing, but I just want to talk about the bananas for a minute. So in my cookbook, Cooking with Scraps, I used banana peels on their own to make a cake. And for that recipe, I was cooking the banana peels to soften them and then blending them up. But between the point when my cookbook came out and then when I was working with Amy, I realized that it was a much easier process to freeze your bananas and then thaw them, because that freeze thaw process softens the peels on their own and you can skip a step and do fewer dishes. And it's really easy to be able to throw whole bananas in your freezer and then use them for this banana bread or use them in your smoothies. They're not going to be the most visually appealing thing, but it tastes fine and it doesn't look that much different at all when it's in the bread. You might see a few more black specks, but that's about it.
Right. And on that point, you still need to really ripen the banana
Yes.
beforehand. So you want your banana to, get to that point where maybe you don't really want to eat it in hand. I mean, you want it super ripe, and then you still want to freeze it.
Yes, we're not recommending that you put the green bananas in your freezer.
Right.
That's not going to be the most flavorful option. The riper your banana is, the better it's going to taste.
Lindsay-Jean, do you, I'm sorry, that's me. Do you take off the top and the bottom of the banana?
Yes, just a little bit off the top and bottom.
Okay.
And you can do that before or after freezing. Either way is fine.
Thank you. Yes, that was the voice of me.
Feel free to keep asking questions. I won't jump every time.
Okay.
So first to start, we're just going to blend.
Wait, one more question. I'm sorry. How do you wash the peels?
I always buy organic when I'm baking at home with anything that I'm going to be using the peels, or I would be buying, like, not bananas, obviously, but like apples. I would go to the farmer's market and talk to the farmers of how they're growing their fruits and vegetables, because they might not be certified organic, but they might still be growing in a way that is organic. And then I rinse or scrub depending on the item.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we are just going to use an immersion blender to blend these. Since that is your side, I'm going to let you go ahead and do that one. We'll switch to overhead view so you can see what's happening.
Okay, I think that's good. So I just want to know,
Amy,
yes.
we could not hear anything you said while the blender was on. So if you guys made any comments, could you repeat them?
Yeah, we didn't say a word because it was super loud. I'm gonna tell you now that I did it for quite a while, and I hope that you can see in there, maybe if you didn't hear it, or should I not have?
How many bananas did you use?
We use 290 grams, so it's a banana or two, depending on how big your bananas are. And this is a great point for us to say how much we recommend baking by weight and not by volume. We did include volume measurements in the cookbook because we know they're popular and some people do tend to use them, but you're going to have a much more accurate result every time if you stick with weight. And digital scales are really fairly inexpensive. So highly recommend picking up one if you don't already have one.
And what would you do if you didn't have an immersion blender?
I would use a food processor or a really high-powered blender.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, so whatever you're using, you can't over mix them, so don't be shy about it. And you want to make sure that you mix it enough because you don't really want any chunks of the peel. Now they are fine and you can eat them, but I know from making thousands of these that people who aren't used to it, if they come to a little piece of banana bread and it has a little chunk of something, they're a little bit surprised. So take the time and blend it well.
So now that we have our bananas blended, then in this bowl, we are also going to add sugar, eggs, butter that's been melted, and vanilla extract. So we have 205 grams of granulated sugar. We're going to add that in. And we have a half a cup or 110 grams of unsalted butter that we've melted. And we have 1.5 teaspoons of vanilla extract. And then one thing that I've learned from taking classes here at Bake is to crack my eggs separately. I used to crack my eggs right into whatever I was making. And I have learned that it's just a better habit to get into, to crack it separately, just so if the egg happens to not be good or there's anything in it, it's a lot easier to fix off to the side than it is if you've already mixed it in with everything in the bowl.
Are there any substitutes for egg and butter?
We have not tested that with those substitutes, but if those are things that you're not eating and you regularly make substitutes, you could absolutely try it with whatever substitutes you regularly do.
Okay. So Madeline asks, or says, banana peels taste bitter to her. And does your process eliminate that bitterness? And if so, how does that happen?
I haven't picked up on bitterness from them.
I don't think it's bitter. I think ripening them really helps. And then the freezing for sure. And then, you know, it's in this cake. So if there's a lot of sugar in here, that would cover any of the bitterness, but I've never noticed it to be bitter at all. So while Lindsay-Jean is mixing that, I realized that we had another bakery member prepare the ingredients for us. And in the book, we wrote the recipe using all-purpose flour or using some whole grain flour. So we've just sent a friend to go change what we have because they measured out only all-purpose. And we want to show you the recipe using whole grain.
Okay.
2 questions. What kind of vanilla did you use? And you used 3 eggs, is that correct?
It is 2 eggs.
2 eggs. And any particular kind of vanilla?
We really love Nielsen Massey vanilla. So bourbon vanilla,
Ooh,
it's really fantastic.
that sounds delicious.
Okay.
Okay. How much butter did you use?
We used half a cup, 110 grams.
Okay, thank you. And remember, all of these recipes are in the book.
Yes, this is in the book. So now that we have these liquid ingredients all mixed up, we're going to do our dry ingredients. And so to use some of the whole grains, we're going to use 125 grams of a soft white whole wheat flour. And then we are going to use 85 grams of all-purpose flour.
just gonna fit in here. Okay. 5.
And then we need 85 of that one.
And container.
And then we are also going to use 3/4 of a teaspoon of baking soda and 3/4 of a teaspoon of fine salt. And then we are going to mix all of the dry ingredients together, just gonna whisk them up with a whisk or a fork. And then once we do that, we'll add our dry ingredients into the wet ingredients.
Can all wheat flour be used only?
Yes, I think it would be fine. It'll just be a little bit denser.
Okay. And can you use maple syrup instead of sugar?
That might be a more complicated switch because the sugar helps with structure. So I don't think that would work. You may be able to reduce the sugar and substitute a little bit of maple syrup. If you wanted to use maple sugar, there would be a greater likelihood that that it would work, or that you could use more of that. You sort of use half and half maple sugar and white sugar.
Okay.
So this recipe obviously is relatively simple. So what makes it special is the choice of the ingredients and processing the bananas in that way. So using, fresh eggs, using really great vanilla extract.
Do you
And
use room temperature eggs?
Yes. And I really love this recipe as it is, but it also, it is kind of a blank canvas that lends itself well to messing with it if you would like, whether that's adding chocolate chips like we're going to today, or adding some chopped nuts. I think we mentioned in the head notes, maybe even a splash of bourbon if you feel like it.
I do feel like it.
Okay, good.
Or you could just drink a little bit of bourbon while you're making it.
Or both.
Or both, a little for the bowl, a little for you.
And Teresa, that would make me feel like Julia Child, but Teresa asks, can gluten-free flour be used instead of the flours you used?
I think this would work with gluten free.
Like if you're using a cup for cup thing, yep. Okay, so I added in 200 grams of semi-sweet chocolate chunks, totally optional, but highly recommended. And then we already preheated our oven to 350 degrees. And then we prepared our baking pan. We just sprayed it with a little bit of nonstick spray. And then we're gonna just pour our batter in there.
You don't put parchment paper on it?
Nope, you don't need to.
But there's no, oh, there is butter in it. I was gonna say my recipe calls for oil.
Well, we did spray the pan, so that will be good enough.
How many of these do you sell like in a week?
My guess is probably around 500.
Wow.
And during busy times of the year, possibly double that.
Wow.
You didn't know that banana bread was for celebrating, but
It
it is. It's actually made as like a base for a sundae.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it can be used for a lot of different things.
So there you can see our final banana bread.
Gorgeous.
And we are happy to answer any questions you have on banana bread or otherwise.
Okay, well, let's go. I'm generally keeping to the Q&A. So if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A. Sally asks, are there nutrients in banana peel that are not in the actual fruit?
There is more fiber and there is more potassium. I mean, there's both of those in the actual fruit, but there are higher levels of fiber, especially in the peel.
Okay. And how would frozen bananas with the peel work in smoothies? I know we talked about this earlier. Pam says, I don't like the taste of raw, plain banana peel.
Well, it tastes different than if you're eating like a raw banana peel that's fresh. You know, that freezing and thawing process, or just the freezing process if you're putting frozen chunks in a smoothie, really does soften the peel and change it. I will sometimes cut the banana with the peel on into chunks and freeze it, and then just toss those chunks into my smoothie after they're frozen. And I've never gotten the bitterness.
Okay, awesome. You said 350 degrees for how long?
It bakes for 60 minutes, about.
Do you do the whole putting the toothpick in?
Yes, yep.
Okay, and you chose butter for this recipe over oil. Is there a particular reason for that?
Butter has more flavor than into flavor.
I agree with that. And I'm not a chef or a cook. I'm a butter lover. So Bethany asks, is there some produce you steer clear of that have a higher concentration of lead in their peels? And I know you said you buy organic, so does that have an effect?
There is a website that you can check out, a resource for the Dirty Dozen. Every year it gets updated with what fruits and vegetables have the highest pesticides and then have the lowest. So you can use that as a guide to help you. Organic can definitely cost more, and with food prices, what they are, obviously that's a choice of maybe you're deciding which things you're buying organic and which things you aren't. But I can't specifically speak to the lead question.
Well, Katie says you've converted her. She's gonna, your banana bread looks delicious. Mary says, she'd asked how long you bake for, which you said 60 minutes, but what's the volume of nuts if you go with nuts that you throw in there?
We'd use about the same thing as we did for the chocolate chips, so 200 grams.
Yeah, and you're probably gonna want to chop the nuts, depending on what kind of chips.
Okay. Let's see. Did you use salted or unsalted butter?
Unsalted.
We always use unsalted because then you can control how much salt goes in the rest.
Separate question. Pat asks, when spinach gets dark and slimy, can it still be used in recipes?
I would say that's kind of a personal call. When greens start to get a tiny bit slimy, I still use them. I will often just saute them at that point versus having them in a salad. But if they start to get really slimy, I would not. This is an important part, I think, of fighting food waste, is storing your food properly. So taking the time to store your greens well so that they don't get to this point, and checking on your fridge every so often to just see what you have lurking in the back corners and bottom of drawers to make sure that you're avoiding letting things go to that point.
I had a program last week with Sarah Robertson Barnes, who does a lot of stuff about sustainability, and it was about limiting food wastage. And she actually showed a picture of where you should put different things in your refrigerator to make them to maximize their shelf life. Let's see. This is a funny question because I have the same issue. A lot of banana bread has a mushy middle. Is that just undercooked, or is there another issue?
Yeah, I think it's underbaked.
Okay.
So, you know, if you make, the smaller you make them, the easier it's going to be to bake them effectively. So this recipe is actually a pretty big banana bread, and that's why it's going for 60 minutes. If you had, if you baked it in a different kind of pan, maybe you had smaller pans and you divided it between two, or if you used even a 9x13 and you made it very low, you could bake it for much less time. And then you would probably not have any problem at all with the, you know, sort of that mucky middle. Some of us really like
I also like it mushy, but that might be because a lot of my banana bread ends up mushy. Um, let's see. This is an interesting comment from Teresa, who's in Western Mass, and she said Baldwin's vanilla is handcrafted in Western Stockbridge for all of us people in Massachusetts, and it's a family-owned company that we should support. Is the vanilla that you use, is that from a local organization, or is that just one that you prefer?
It's actually from a company that's in Chicago, so relatively local, but vanilla beans are not grown in the United States, so, you know, but supporting a family that, a business that's, you know, local in your community, even if they're importing the beans, I think is as local as we can get with vanilla extract.
Would you ever use vanilla bean instead of the extract?
Personally, in a banana bread, I would not. I mean, it just feels a little wasteful. Often vanilla beans are used if you can see them. It's a little bit showy. It's to show off that you're using the vanilla beans, and so you might use it in whipped cream or in a vanilla cheesecake or in pastry cream where you can actually see it while you're enjoying it. You won't, obviously you will not see the bean in here, and you would have to use a lot of bean in order to get enough of that vanilla flavor to overpower the banana. And this, I wouldn't.
Okay. Julie asked, do you have food storage or produce storage tips starting a garden this year? And I want to waste less. I've worked hard to grow it. My only suggestion is to use glass containers, to not use plastic. But that's just me. Let's ask the experts.
That's a big question. I will choose just a couple favorites, but yes, there are tons of things that they could be doing, and that's an awesome start to be growing their own food. As I mentioned before, greens is one of my favorite ones to talk about. I think not all of us realize that your produce is going to last longer in general if it's unwashed. So if you don't bring everything home and wash it right away, you're going to be better off right off the bat. Wait until you're using it to wash it. That said, it's important to keep in mind your own personal habits. And if you're going to eat more fruits and vegetables, if it's washed and ready for you to use, then go ahead and do that. Just keep in mind that it will tend to go bad faster. But for greens, I do tend to wash those first because I will eat more of them if they are washed and ready for me. So I like to wash them and store them right in a salad spinner, because then they are clean, but there's still a tiny bit of moisture in the bottom, but they're not sitting in the moisture. And so just putting that whole salad spinner in the fridge is going to help keep them fresh and crisp. Or if you don't want to take up that much space to put the whole salad spinner in there, if you just loosely wrap the greens in like a tea towel, and then store them in a glass container, like you mentioned, or a zip top bag in the fridge. Those will help those greens last a lot longer. One more that I will mention is for any root vegetables, to separate the leafy greens from the roots and store them separately. So your carrots, your beets, anything like that, both parts will last a lot longer if you're separating them.
Wow. Okay. So just a couple comments. Mary says that slimy means it's growing microorganisms. It might be dangerous to eat. That was going back to that spinach question. Madeline says that the advice to use organic bananas is good because that the 12 whatever says that the bananas have the most insecticides generally. And then going back to washing the bananas, do you use any particular kind of soap, or you just rinse them?
I personally just rinse them. I don't use like a fruit and vegetable wash. Personal choice.
Okay. What about the bakery? I mean, Amy, do you have different rules or regulations around how you manage your fresh produce?
No, you have to wash it. There's no specific rule of exactly how you wash it. We also just rinse.
Oh, okay, great. Let's see. I usually add paper towels to my greens, and then I save the towels to clean messy things like the spills of grease later. It's a good use of paper towels. Can you talk a little bit about some of the other recipes in both of the books? I'm especially interested, obviously, in cooking with scraps, things that you use regularly, as well as and celebrate every day, things that you use the grains for, and multigrains and things like that.
cooking with scraps, I mean, the whole book covers that, so it's harder for me to narrow that down.
Is there a recipe that became the most popular?
I would say that the banana cake actually was one of the most popular, which I mentioned earlier, uses just the peel and not the whole fruit, although you could certainly adapt that recipe to do that. One of the recipes that I think I hear the most about is the fudgy aquafaba brownies. So aquafaba is the liquid from cooking beans, or that comes in a can of beans, and it whips up like egg white. So it's a great way to make things vegan, or just use a product that's often drained to make other food.
I forgot to mention, Lindsay-Jean, that I actually saw, the first time I actually saw you was on the Food Network on the kitchen, and you were making the banana cake. And that was just fascinating. And so Amy, yes, and some of your favorite recipes from Celebrate Every Day?
Well, one of the recipes that we didn't mention already was the Bumble Honey Rye Cake.
What kind of cake is that?
It's a bumble honey rye cake.
Ooh, what makes it bumble, honey, and rye?
honey, bumblebee.
Yes, and then it uses buckwheat honey in it and rye.
Rye is in the drink, or rye is in the
No,
flour?
rye is in the flour.
Grain.
And then it has a lot of really great spices in it, like cloves and nutmeg and ginger, cinnamon. Oh, and there's black tea in it also. I forgot about that one.
That sounds delicious. Is that a recipe that you developed, Amy?
No, I didn't develop the original version, but this is one of those things. Most recipes are, they're iterations. So what's different about this one is that we didn't used to use 100% whole grain rye. And so that's sort of exciting. Had a lot of white flour, and a little bit of what's called medium rye in it. And so we've evolved it to, we're milling our own rye and only use flour in it.
Oh, I love the idea of milling my own flour. I'm sorry, Lindsay-Jean?
No, another one that I was going to say and Celebrate Every Day that I really love is the rhubarb cheesecake bars. And those use einkorn flour, which is a little bit of an unusual one. I feel like you don't always see that, but it adds such a lovely flavor to the crust of that. I love it.
Oh, I've never heard of that. I'm going to look it up. Liz says her mother talked about first banana she saw had red peels. Have you ever cooked with anything like that?
I mean, it's like any other type of produce. There used to be so many more type varieties of bananas, and we've narrowed down to that we're mostly eating one type of banana, which is problematic for lots of reasons. But yeah, if you have access to other types of bananas, go forth and use their peels.
Yeah, I like those little ones. I feel like they're more flavorful. Katie asks, do you have any suggestions for orange peels? Such a good question.
Yes, I mean, you can definitely candy orange peels, as you've probably seen a lot. I like to, whenever a recipe calls for juice of any citrus, orange, lemon, lime, I like to make sure that I'm zesting the fruit ahead of time. And then you can even freeze that, like put some zest in little ice cube trays and save that for later use. So you're not wasting any of the flavorful part of these fruits. You're juicing that.
Okay.
And then in our book, we have the olive oil cake.
Oh, I love olive oil cake.
And it uses a whole orange in it, which is really special.
So the juice and the rind?
Yes. Yep.
Even like we were always told not to use the rind or the inside, that whitish part, because it's bitter, but you do use it.
Yes.
Sometimes the bitterness is really a nice offset to other flavors too.
Let's have a couple questions about broth.
It's in our Bakehouse book.
Saving scraps and bones for broth. After cooking vegetables, Joan saves the water and broth and freezes it. And and uses it for vegetable broth. I know in cooking for scraps, it had a really good broth as well. Was it a vegetable broth, just using scraps?
It talked about multiple different kinds of broths, yes, and different tips and tricks. And yeah, I like to have different zip top bags going in the freezer so you can have one all-purpose for vegetables. In the summer, I really like to collect corn cobs and make a corn cob broth with them. I'd like to have a whole bag going of like Parmesan rinds or other hard cheese rinds, and then you can, you know, use them one at a time in a soup or pot of beans, but you can also make a whole Parmesan rind broth with a whole bunch of them too.
Oh my gosh. Okay. What would be a good go-to for frosting on banana cakes or cupcakes? Would you use cream cheese, or do you have some other thoughts?
I think this is highly personal preference. You could go with a peanut butter frosting.
Chocolate.
I'm on board with the cream cheese plan,
Mhm.
whatever flavors you like with banana.
Oh, okay. Great. Carol says, make the orange cake that uses the whole orange put through a blender, no seeds. Okay. And Bethany asks, do you have recipes using scraps for things besides foods like cleaning, dyeing paper, etc.?
I do not, but they're definitely out there.
Mhm.
I personally focus on food.
It's not a bad thing. Robin says, I put Parmesan rind in a soup and it becomes slimy on the outside. Do you eat it or discard it at that point?
Slimy is a little bit of a negative description. It's softer. I mean, I kind of like to nibble on it, but you know, personal preference. If you're not into the texture, you don't have to.
Now, question about that. I know there's usually a wax film around Parmesan around the ends. I mean, is that possible that they Robin didn't take that off and it was cut slimy? Does that make sense?
Parmesan wouldn't have a wax rind on it, but there are definitely some cheeses that have wax on the outside, and you don't want to be eating those.
No.
But anything else that's just like just a hard rind, but it doesn't have a wax coating, it's perfectly fine to eat. Or drop in soups like that. It's totally edible. It's just a different texture, like some of the other things that we talked about. You can also be saving little bits of those ends and any other odds and ends of little cheese you have, and then blend all of those up together with like some cream cheese, something softer to help it blend, and then turn it into like a cheese spread.
Okay. Sorry, Robin, I didn't mean to throw you under the bus there. That's the kind of thing I would do, like, because I'm not a great chef, but I'm a good follower of recipes. So can you tell us, are you going to be doing more cookbooks in the future?
Well, Lindsay-Jean, you can tell us. Working on a book right now.
I will be working on one, yes. I am currently, it's in very, very early stages, far too early to even give you a timeline, but I am working on one with Zingerman's Deli. So hopefully in the future we'll see that one, and you never know about Amy and another.
Yeah, but we need to give it some time. Both we need to have other new ideas and new recipes. And so there was 5 years between the first book of the Bakehouse and the second. So you never know. And a little time to forget the parts that were difficult, like having a child, little time off in between. But this was actually relatively easy. So we'll see.
And do you find that you use most of the recipes in the book at Zingerman's, or this is more for like the public use?
Well, these are all, with the exception of maybe one. Everything in Celebrate Every Day is stuff that the Bakehouse makes on a regular or seasonal basis, depending. It's just, they've all been scaled down to make at home instead of making huge batches of.
Wow, I'm gonna have to come there someday. Trisha
Yeah.
said, oh, I'd like to. Trisha says, when I make broth, my veggie put all their flavor in the pot. So then I don't know what to do with the carrots and onions at that point. Do you just throw them away?
This is personal preference again. That is my go-to answer for so many things this evening. A lot of the times with veggie broth, I like to use just like the scrappiest of the scrap, like that you're saving in this zip top bag. So you're putting most of that carrot to good use earlier, and maybe it's just like funky bits that you're saving. But if you certainly can use whole vegetables to make stock with as well. And in that case, you know, the vegetable has given most of its all to the stock that you're making. So most of the time people will take them out and discard them, but depending on what you're going for, you could still blend them up. Like when I make tomato sauce, I put an onion or a half an onion in it. And the recipe calls for you to discard the onion at the end of making that sauce, but I just grab my immersion blender and blend it up because it may not have tons of flavor yet left, but it's still fine. And then it just adds more bulk to my tomato sauce.
Mhm. Oh, I think Trisha wanted to know if she's going to discard it, should she put it into the compost or the trash?
That depends on where you are at like your composting rules. Like here in Ann Arbor, we could put that in our city compost. We can put cooked food into it. If you are doing it at home and you have an open compost bin, you might want to avoid putting a lot of cooked foods in it because it could attract more creatures to your compost. But if you have a closed compost bin, it could be okay. It's depends on the situation.
Gotcha. Okay, last question, and it's a hard one. What was your favorite book in each cookbook? So Cooking with Scraps, Celebrate Every Day.
It's so hard to choose. My initial thought for Celebrate Every Day is the rhubarb cheesecake that I mentioned, but I just kind of want to look through because there are so many that I love. I really, coming up into summer, the fresh fruit tart is tasty, but it's so beautiful. And it can really be customized to what you have on hand.
That is beautiful.
Yeah.
Okay, so how about this? Your favorite to make, your favorite to eat.
We're making it any easier.
Nope.
Well, there's a soup in the book called Gabor's Hungarian bean soup, and I eat it every week. We make it on Mondays, at the bakery, and I've probably eaten it every week for the past 5 years. So that's a testimony to it. I must really like it if I can eat it every week. It's probably not my most favorite thing to make, but in the book, we have a recipe for paella, and I love making paella. I love because I do it outside. It means it's relatively warm weather. Usually I do it when I have people to enjoy it with. And so it's just a really happy kind of festive.
Yeah. Oh, that's so nice. How about you, Lindsay-Jean? What's your favorite thing to make?
I really like making pie crust, so I might go for one of the pies for that. But favorite to eat, I love the cheddar herb scones and could make them on a regular basis. And my daughter's favorite to eat is the chocolate chess pie. She loves that one.
I love chess pie as well. You guys have gotten it all. Well, wow. Thank you so much for this. I think we've learned a lot. I feel like we'll all be sustainability warriors, but also really pay more attention to our food and what we're doing with it and where we're getting it from. So thank you very, very much for both being here tonight with us. And for everybody who joined us with all of your wonderful questions, go out there and cook and bake and do it right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Have a good night, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.